Tesla.
Oh, really? Embarrassing. What?
Surgery, you'll be walking immediately. When my knee was, I had bad knee so that was 91 hours. Often I go to Can I have one? Hello? Oh, never mind. One time I went and my knee was off and sweating. She did her magic. And I came back and my knee's not hurt. I was she said, when I changed the way I moved them,
Got him now, you know. But you can have turkey. I like corned beef too, so it's okay.
Hi at home? You can hear me? Good Shabbos. How are you doing? All right, here we go. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'dorotam berit olam Bein Reuven b'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam, oti le'olam, v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורתם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות et ha-Shabbat ledaratam berit olam. Ubayom hashvi Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, Shabbat vaynafash, v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat. Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledaratam berit olam. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. All right. Good Shabbos. Torah portion, blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that the Torah portion Truma is a very good competitor for most boring Torah portion in the Torah. It's really not that exciting, and you can try to pretend that unless you're like an architect and you like this stuff and building and your cubits and loops and planks you can pretend that that's exciting, but it's not that exciting. What is exciting is the creation of the tabernacle, which is what we're building, and why you need it, or what it is. Now, as I was teaching my class at the University of Miami the other day, there's only supposed to be 4 books of the Torah. Right? There wasn't supposed to be numbers, because they weren't supposed to sin and have to wander for 40 years, and then we'd have all these stories about the wandering in the 40 years. It was only supposed to take 11 days to get from Mount Sinai to Israel. And so you weren't supposed to have those 40 years, but because of the sins of the Israelites, God said, well, change of plans. You're not going in 11 days, you're going in 11 days, plus 40 years. And now we're going to have all these other stories and learn all these other things, and fine. So we had the book of Numbers, which in Hebrew is Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness, but there wasn't supposed to be that. Now, if the Israelites were going to go right to Israel, then they could go right to Israel and build the Holy Temple. And instead of having all this information about how to build the tabernacle, we could just have information on how to go to Jerusalem and build the temple. But because we're now going to wander for 40 years, and because it's going to take a long time for other reasons for the Jews to actually build the Torah once they get to the land of Israel, you need a temporary dwelling for the name of God, which becomes the tabernacle, which ultimately we see as the microcosm for the Holy Temple. But, what would you... Now, here's the question. At the time that the Israelites are told to build the tabernacle, they don't yet know about the sin of the spies that they're going to commit later. So a good question they might have asked is, why do we have to build a temporary temple to schlep around with all this detail and all this work and pour all our gold into it? Why do we need to do that? We're going to be in Israel in 11 days and we're going to build the permanent temple. So an immediate answer, and this may not be completely satisfying in terms of why we need the whole tabernacle, but an immediate answer is, when Moses comes down with the Luchot, when he comes down with the 10 Commandments, and then he writes the Torah, what do you do with the Luchot? Where do you put them? You need something, some kind of ark, to hold them. And if then God's presence is going to be in that location, there are rules. And so the immediate answer is that might have been satisfying for the Jews, saying, why do I have to give all my gold to this thing? And the answer is because it's to hold God's presence, right? Because we had the very famous verse a couple weeks ago, Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, right? I think it's Exodus 25:8, which I think it's 25:8. I know it because it used to be on my stationery at my previous temple. It had that verse at the top. Now I just have senior rabbi.
What's better?
Either one. I don't come up with it. It's whatever the temple provides for my stationery. I didn't make it up. But Va'asuli mikdash. Now, that means you shall make me a sanctuary. You know how to say holy temple in Hebrew? Beit mikdash, Beit hamikdash, right? Beit mikdash. So listen closely. Va'asuli mikdash. Make me a mikdash. And what he's saying is make the tabernacle. Later on, the holy temple won't be called mikdash. It will be called Beit hamikdash, because a permanent house. Whereas a suli mikdash that we're talking about here in Exodus is temporary to wander around in the wilderness. But then after he says vasuli mikdash, make me a sanctuary, it says v'shachanti b'tocham, that I'll dwell there. So when you're creating something for God to dwell in, it takes a lot of work. And so this Torah portion is all about explaining what it takes to build that. And then it's not so exciting. However, there's one idea. Now, we've said this term many times, which does not mean that anyone knows what it is. But maybe, I know, where's Ed? Ed, you know. Maseh avot siman labanim. Which means, Ed, you know what I think.
Deeds of the ancestors.
Right. Maseh avot siman labanim. Maseh avot means the things that happened to the matriarchs and patriarchs in Genesis. Siman are a sign, labanim, for the future generations. Right? In other words, Genesis is a paradigm for all of the future of the Jewish people. Okay? And that's the case here as well. In order to understand what the Beit HaMikdash is and what the Holy Temple is, you actually have to go back to Genesis. So, just when you thought we had to look and spend all of our time on this really boring Torah portion, we don't. In order to understand it, we're going to have to go back to Genesis to see what really happened. Okay, but before we do that, we do need some verses in this week's Torah portion. So, okay, we have a few minutes left. If you look at chapter 20, we're in Exodus, chapter 26, verse 18. So the second triennial cycle, we're in the second cycle. Chapter 26 is what makes up that cycle, but we don't need to look at the whole thing. We want to begin at chapter 26, verse 18. Anyone have a page in Plout? 608. Okay. Page 608. Okay, we ready? Norman, you're right into the mic? Here we go. Verse 18.
Okay. The length of each plank, is that the one?
You shall make beams. That's how mine started.
Oh, that's 15.
No, 18.
The planks. Of the planks of the tabernacle, make 20 planks on the south side, making 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks. 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 tenons, and 2 sockets under each following plank for its 2 tenons. And for the other side wall of the tabernacle, on the north side, 20 planks, with their 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under the one plank and 2 sockets under each following plank. And for the rear of the tabernacle, to the west, make 6 planks, and make 2 planks for the corners of the tabernacle at the rear. They shall match at the bottom, and terminate alike at the top inside one ring. Thus shall it be with both of them. They shall form the 2 corners. Thus there shall be 8 planks with their sockets of silver, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under the first plank, and 2 sockets under each of the other planks. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the planks of the one side of the wall of the tabernacle, 5 bars for the planks of the other side wall of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the planks of the wall of the tabernacle at the rear to the west. The center bar halfway up the planks shall run from end to end.
Okay, and that's it. Sure. It's terrible. And it's terrible. There's nothing to talk about. It's boring. If you're an architect, it's great. But, for anyone else, however, comes verse 28 and saves us. So if you look at verse 28, the middle bar inside the beams shall extend from end to end. And we don't really know what that is. But it is made out of wood. It's made out of this special type of wood. And a good question then would be, where would you get a piece of wood this large in the wilderness? Have you ever seen a picture of the Sinai? There's no trees. Now, they took the gold and the silver and the dolphin skins and all these things from Egypt, but a big long plank that extends from end to end is hard to schlep. And so a good question is, well, where did they get this thing? So there's a midrash. If you look on the sheet, you see where it says Genesis Rabbah 94:4. So there's a midrash on this, but it refers back to Genesis. So look what it says. Would you mind reading? You sort of says the very beginning.
Israel and everything that he had traveled and came to Beersheba, and he slaughtered feast offerings to the God of his father Isaac.
All right, so when it says Israel, it means Jacob, right? Jacob. But it also, in a way, whenever it seems, when it says Israel, his name, it's like he's representing all of us, but we're really talking about this guy, Jacob, who spent some time in Beersheba. Okay, let's keep going.
Israel and everything that he had traveled came to Beersheba. Where did he go? Rav Nachman said he went to cut down the cedars that his grandfather Abraham had planted in Beersheba, just as it says he planted in Beersheba. Genesis 21:33. It is written, and the central bar inside the boards in Exodus 26:28, Rabbi Levi said the central bar was 32 cubits long. Where did they find it at that time? It teaches that they were hidden with them from the days of Jacob, our patriarch. That is what is written. And everyone with whom acacia wood was found, with whom acacia wood could be found, is not written here, but rather with whom acacia wood was found. Now, did I read that right?
Mm-hmm. Don't worry, I'll explain in English after.
Rabbi Levi said they chopped them down from Migdal Tzvaya, and they brought them with them to Egypt, and neither was a knot or a crack was found in them. They were acacia trees in Migdala, and they treated them as prohibited due to the sanctity of the ark. They came and asked Rabbi Hanina, a colleague of the rabbis. He said to them, "Do not deviate from the custom of your fathers."
Okay, did you pick that up? Okay. Yeah, can you pass that back?
So I was going to comment this before, but now even not more with this piece of wood. So two things. I think you probably don't like home improvement. Some people go, nuts about pieces of wood, but probably not you. But anyway, the real comment is the following. So we think that we're unique in the sense that we travel around the wilderness for 40 years, but we're not. Most early cultures have a narrative of traveling, and I didn't really know that until we visited Hungary a couple years ago, and it turns out that their language is so different because actually they started off in Siberia. And all the way for several years they traveled until finally settled in Hungary. And it's same for other cultures. For instance, the Aztecs were going all around until they finally settled in the middle of the lake in Tenochtitlan. So most cultures have these narratives of traveling before they settle, and they have their portable shrines. So, which ties with what you're saying. So we actually started our traveling before the 40 years, because we went from Israel to Egypt and then back to Israel, and we took the long way around. And so you're saying this piece of wood was actually planted by Abraham.
Exactly.
And eventually ended up in Egypt, and then back the tabernacle. But this was a way of the people at the time. I mean, Egypt was an exception because they had the Nile and they could settle in one place, but most places were nomads.
Okay.
And that was the way of life. And so the plan of a portable tabernacle, it was like the way of those times.
Okay, very nice. Okay, so you picked up on some of where I'm going with it and added some interesting color to it. If you notice, at the beginning of the Midrash, it says Jacob's going down to Beersheba. This is Genesis 46, which means we're at the end of Genesis, which means that Jacob, he goes down to Beersheba, but he's on his way to Egypt. Why is he on his way to Egypt? To see Joseph. And that's where Jacob ends up spending the end of his life. He dies in Egypt. So he's heading down to Egypt. And on his way, he stops at this place there where it says here that his grandfather Abraham had planted in Beersheba. Now, how do I know that Abraham planted something in Beersheba? Because it says so in Genesis 21:33, which we're going to look at in a second. But if you look at Genesis 21:33, Abraham planted some kind of acacia wood there, trees that would grow. And then the rabbis tell us, by the time that Jacob got there, they had grown into, just by chance, the same dimensions that were needed for the middle bar that would be used in the tabernacle that we just read about in verse 28 of chapter 26 of Exodus. Okay, so amazing timing. And then they had to take this acacia wood and handle it in a very careful way so that no cracks or holes were bored into it or anything like that. And they brought it down to Egypt in a certain way so that someday when the Jews would leave Egypt, they would be able to take it with them to use it for the purpose of Mikdash. Okay? Now, that sounds a little far-fetched.
Way far-fetched.
Jay?
How many Hebrews went to Egypt? Was that 80?
70.
70. And they carried all this wood with them as well?
I don't know how much it was. I mean, it was 32 cubits of wood, but they chopped it up in a way that they could schlep it, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. In the video that we have, it's hard to make out how many of them there really were.
And they stored it in the shed.
All right, so now that you're properly skeptical, let's go back to Genesis and figure out what really happened. So if you'll jump back to Genesis with me to chapter 21, verse 33. Page 141, thank you. Page 141. And I think you'll see that this plays out interesting. Okay, Judy, you have it?
Yeah.
Okay, so listen closely. We're Genesis 21, beginning with verse 33.
Abraham planted a tamarisk at Beersheba and invoked there the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines a long time.
Okay, now you may proclaim that you know what a tamarisk is. But the Hebrew is Eshel. Vayita Eshel beBeersheva. He planted an Eshel in Beersheba. Vayikra Sham, and he called there, B'Shem Hashem, the name of God, Kel Olam, forever. Right, this is when he plants this thing, he's saying, whatever it is that I'm planting, this is going to be the name of God forever. Now, how do you get something to be the name of God forever? Well, you plant something that's going to end up in a tabernacle that's going to end up, that's going to end up in the Holy Temple forever. Now, the Holy Temple ended up getting destroyed, but don't worry, it'll be back when the Messiah comes and that magic plank. When the magic plank comes flying out of the sky, be in your shelter, be in your mamad. Yes.
You know, when I looked up Eshel this morning, there was a word, Eshalim, which means provisions for when you're traveling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also an acronym for Ochel, Shtia, and Lina.
But I mean, is there any relationship between why Eshalim, meaning taking all the provisions that you need for traveling?
Yeah, I just told you. It's an acronym for Ochel, Shtia, and Lina, which means food, drink, and a place to rest. And what the Midrash is about to explain it. I'm sorry, the Talmud's about to explain it. But it means that as people were traveling, Abraham was there to provide what they needed. That's where the term comes from. Okay? All right, so now, what's the mikdash? The mikdash is the tabernacle that they schlepped around in the wilderness, right? The Levites took it apart, put it back together, took it apart, as God told them to move around as they wandered for 40 years. But really, it was the microcosm for the Holy Temple that would be built in Jerusalem. Clear so far? The tabernacle was the micro for the Holy Temple that would be built in Jerusalem. Abraham now plants this eshel, whatever that is, that someday in his prophecy he knows is going to be in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. But he doesn't know exactly where the Holy Temple is going to be. When does he first learn where the Holy Temple is going to be? Yes, when God tells him, go to the mountain, take Abraham, and you're going to sacrifice Abraham on the Temple Mount. You know what I mean. It's like you were waiting all day to do that. I mean, you're wrong. Isaac, he's going to sacrifice Isaac. But the point is that the sacrifice of Isaac was meant to be the prototype sacrifice for all the sacrifices that would come later in the Holy Temple. And where he put Isaac would be the spot where the altar would be on the Holy Temple. Okay. So he plants the eshel, whatever that thing means, and he figures out, okay, I have this thing that's later going to be the beam that's going to go in the Holy Temple, but where's the Holy Temple? Well, he's going to learn that when God tells him, go now and sacrifice Isaac on the mountain that I'm going to show you. So you looked at let's just go back now to verse 33. Judy, would you mind reading it one more time? I lost it. Oh, my goodness. All right. Ken has it. Verse 33. Ken has it. Okay, good.
All right, verse 33. Abraham planted a tamarisk at Beersheba and invoked there the name of the Lord, the everlasting God.
Okay, so first thing that happens is he plants the eshel. Second thing that happens is he says this is going to last forever as, like something that's a testimony to God. Now look, the very next verse, what happens? Verse 1. Chapter 22, verse 1.
Oh.
That's why you can't use plow.
Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights which I will point out to you.
Okay. Should I take a bow now, or do you want to hear more?
Let's hear more.
Do you see what just happened? He planted the eshel, which is the wood, the beam that's going to be in the Holy Temple forever. he says that it is going to be for God for all time. And immediately after that, he takes Isaac, the prototype sacrifice, and goes looking for the Holy Temple. It's amazing. Okay, so now we can look at the Talmud. If you look at the second source on the sheet, Sota 10a. Genya, would you mind reading there? The second source on the sheet.
The Gemara discusses Abraham's house. It is written, and he planted an eshel in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. Reish Lakish says, this teaches that Abraham made an orchard and planted in it all kinds of sweet things.
Okay, so the first thing we say is, well, what's an eshel? And the first rabbi comes and says, an eshel is some type of orchard, and he planted all kinds of sweet fruits and things. Well, we'll get to why, but that's the first understanding. Second understanding.
This teaches that Abraham, our forefather, caused the name of the Holy One, blessed be he, to be called out in the mouth of all passers-by. How so? After the guests of Abraham ate and drank, they rose and blessed him.
Right, because as Abraham's, so the eshel, and what the other rabbi is saying is, an eshel is really like an inn, what you would call a pundak. And passerby would come, and Abraham's goal in life was to explain to people monotheism. So someone would come, and he would come and give them free food. And they would say, oh, thank you so much for you giving me this food. And Abraham would say, I'm not giving you anything. This food's from God. And people say, what are you talking about? By the way, there's the Muslims apparently in their midrash, or whatever they have a similar story. And when I was, I was at APAC this weekend, and when I got to the airport in D.C., I got picked up I put my suitcase in the trunk, and I saw the Muslim, the prayer rugs, and the driver was from Pakistan, and he saw my yarmulke. So, okay, here we go. So for a few minutes, no one said anything. I never do. I have no interest in talking about the weather. Yeah, I just want to get to where I'm going. But finally he said, we should all get along. Moses, he was a little off on his history. He talked about how Moses and Jesus and Muhammad all got along really well and didn't kill anybody. And I didn't want to point out that 2 out of 3 is not bad. But then he starts telling me a midrash, how we're all from Abraham, and a variation of this midrash in their tradition about how Abraham used to try to explain to people that there's only one God. And it was interesting because his story was like a little bit different than our story, but this is our story. So basically it says here, right, they would eat and drink and they arose to bless him, and Abraham would say, no, don't bless me. So the point of the eshel, I don't know what Abraham did with the eshel, but the rabbis are trying to explain to us that the point of the eshel was Abraham's way of trying to explain to the world that there's only one God. Right, and that was what his inn was. So, when you went to his inn, you didn't get to just relax. You also had to deal with the theology lectures. But some people call that a bonus, other people call that annoying. Right, can you use the mic?
I thought I heard that the translation for eshel was a provision for traveling, and maybe it could be read that if this is a provision for traveling in the name of the Lord, and it's going to become the beam that they're using to build the tabernacle. So that's how I would think about it, that he planted the seed or the tamarisk. He knew that it was going to be a provision for them traveling when they were building the tabernacle.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. I like that. I mean, look, ultimately, I think even in Abraham's mind, it was supposed to be permanent. I'm planting this, and now I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and I'm going to see where the Holy Temple is going to be, and that's where this beam's going to go. But it's got to get there, and it's not going to, it's going to come from Egypt, so it is going to be schlepped. So that's a very interesting point. Very interesting. Okay, I want to just show you a couple more places in Genesis to try to make this make sense. So if you'll skip with me now, I know this is annoying, but if you skip with me now to Genesis 28, verse 22. Genesis 28, verse 22. Well, actually, verse 20. We'll go back to verse 20. Actually, you're going to kill me. We need the whole story. So 28, verse 12.
28, verse 12.
Chapter 28, verse 12. Okay, great. Jeff, do you have it? Would you mind reading it? Chapter 28 of Genesis, verse 12. 194.
He had a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and its top reached to the sky, and messengers of God were going up and down on it. And standing beside him was Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, who said, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of your father, Abraham's house, and God of Isaac's house. The ground on which you are lying I will assign to you and to your offspring. Your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you and your descendants. Remember, I am with you. I will protect you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely Adonai is present in this place, and I did not know it. Shaken, he said, How awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He named that site Beth-El, but previously the name of the city had been Luz. Jacob then made a vow, saying, If God remains with me, protecting me on this journey, and I am making, and give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and I return safe to my father's house, Adonai shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's abode, and of all that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you. Keep going.
So I'm sorry, can you read verse 22 one more time?
22. And this stone which I have set up as a pillar shall be God's abode, and all of that you give me, I will set aside a tithe for you.
Okay, so Jacob has this dream, and where exactly he is debatable amongst the rabbis, but I think the general idea is that he's standing in Jerusalem and probably right on the Temple Mount, and that's Beit El, right? What does Beit El mean? The house of God, right? And so he says, everyone who used to live here, a bunch of losers. Literally, it was called lose.
Close.
These are people from the city of Luz. Guys, I'll be here all week. But he said, we're changing the name to Beit El, because this is going to be the house of God. But Jacob, now, the wood needs to ultimately go to Egypt. Isaac is not allowed to go to Egypt. Remember when he was about to go to Egypt, God said to him, you're not allowed to go. You're the prototype sacrifice, and a sacrifice, anything that's sacrificed on the Holy Temple, has to stay in the land of Israel its whole life. Because if you had like an animal, this is halakha, if you had an animal that crossed over the border into Jordan, it's no longer fit to be offered in the Holy Temple. Right? Once it's been consecrated. And Isaac's already been consecrated because he's been up to the mountain with his father. So Isaac's not allowed to leave. So this has to skip a generation and go to Jacob because he's going to be the next patriarch after Abraham who's allowed to go to Egypt. And in fact, he does go to Egypt and he dies in Egypt. So he can schlep the wood on his way, which is probably the reason he had to go there at the end of his life. I mean, everything at the end of Genesis is setting up for what's going to happen in Exodus, right? That's the whole point of the Torah, is that the Jews are going to be slaves in Egypt and try to come back. But what's happening now is, he says, God, if you're going to be with me on these journeys that I'm going on, right, because I'm going to go face Esau and he's going to try and kill me, but if you protect me, then I'm going to do something for you. And if you look at verse 22, the Hebrew's a little better. Well, Hebrew's a lot better. But he says, Va'even hazot, this stone, asher samti, that I've placed, matzeva, as like a pillar or some sort of monument, Yihiyeh Beit Elokim, will be the house of God. I'm going to build the house of God. If you keep your vow and protect me, I'm going to build the house of God. Now, the problem with that is, he never comes back and builds the house of God. He makes a vow. And if we go back to verse 20, Jacob says, this is my vow. This is an actual vow. It's a neder. There's a whole tractate in the Talmud called nedarim, vows. If you make a vow, you got to keep it. Well, what's the vow that he makes? The vow is that if you protect me, I will do something. What will I do? This pillar that I've set up will become, Yihiyeh, will become Beit Elokim, will become the house of God. Now, it's true, it will, but he doesn't build it. And that's a problem, because he said he was going to. Now, something happens, though, that he does do something. So I have to show you a couple more sources. By the way, Rashi here, if you look on the back of the sheet, Rashi says, what will be the purpose of this house of God that he's going to build? And Rashi said, not Rashi, Rashi's grandson, the Rashbam says, to present to God burnt offerings. If you protect me. But think about what he's really saying. God, if you protect me, Jacob, then I'm going to build a house for you. But he's not really Jacob. He's Israel. So maybe it means, if you protect us, then we'll build a house for you, which ultimately does happen. But the point of it is, it'll be a place where the sacrifices are offered. We know that means the Holy Temple. Okay.
Is that in Jerusalem, or what was it?
Yeah. This is right on the Temple Mount.
He hadn't accepted God unless God came through.
Wait, sorry, one at a time?
Does that mean that it says, if you do this, then I'll do this?
Yes.
It implies that he hasn't accepted God as his God.
Right, so the question was, if you do this, then I'll build the house, and if you protect me, then you will be my God, which is a pretty similar implication. Yeah, good point. Stuart, and then
Relationship to God. Microphone, multiple occasions.
Can you start over? Sorry.
Our relationship to God as a people
has
on multiple occasions then been transactional, which puts it in a very different context, in a sense, and much more conditional. Not necessarily a commitment, only a commitment based on receiving something in return.
Mm-hmm. So, and ultimately, what's interesting about this, though, I mean, there are a lot more lessons we can learn here, but God already told him, I'm going to protect you. So now why is he saying, well, if you protect me? And maybe what he's saying is, well, if this thing with the Jews is going to continue, I need to be protected because I'm Jacob, I'm Israel. And if I die, that's it. So, I mean, he has children, but you still need Jacob. And he's going to be already what we're seeing here. This is where I say, Maaseh Avat Siman Labanim. What happens to the matriarchs and patriarchs is a sign for what's going to happen in the future. Already what we're seeing in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the construction of the Holy Temple. Right? They're Abraham plants the wood that's going to be used for the beam that we're talking about in Truma. Then he takes Isaac, who's going to be the prototype sacrifice. Then he goes to the Temple Mount, and he puts Isaac on an altar. And then he takes him down and offers the ram instead. But now we have Jacob as well wondering, well, what's going on with that wood? And what's my role in building this house right here at Beit El, which I've already changed the name to, but I didn't really change the name to it because Abraham already did when he planted the Eshel, and he said this is going to be the house of God forever. Now what I'm doing is I'm continuing the tradition that Abraham started, that we Jews are going to build this holy temple right here. And so when we get to the beginning of building the temple in Exodus, what I'm trying to say is these ideas were already explained by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's only now they're coming to fruition down the road in later generations. Joe?
You seem to be saying that Beth El is actually Jerusalem. Is that correct?
Well, there's a debate.
Because, that's
right.
Because prior to Jerusalem becoming the capital of the Israelites, they were making sacrifices in many different places, one of which was Bethel.
Right.
And I remember reading someplace that Bethel, when the Muslims conquered Israel, they changed the name to Bet Allah, and later on that became Ramallah.
Boy, what are the chances? Well, you're talking. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. No, okay, so there's a debate in the Gemara. And the debate in the Gemara is, was the top of the ladder was at an angle, as most ladders are. It's hard to go up a ladder if it's straight. And the question is, was the top of the ladder over the Temple Mount, or was the bottom of the ladder sitting at the Temple Mount? Because the ladder was in two different locations. But one of them was either over the Temple Mount, or one of them was at the Temple Mount, and the rabbis aren't sure. So you're right, there are two different locations. But the idea is that wherever Jacob was, he was connected to the Temple Mount by the other end of the ladder. Which, in other words, he was saying, I'm not there yet, but that's where my people are trying to go. Eileen, then
so
Bobby.
the symmetry and order of the Torah, well, it's full of symmetry and order, and you just summarized this morning what we've been talking about from this to that to the other, and it's all connected, and there's order to it. And I've been kind of distracted this morning trying to figure out what is the Torah trying to say? What can we get from verse 18 through 27, I think, that we started in Exodus 26. And I thought, that's the order. It's order and it's symmetry. If you look at it, this many on this side, it's the same on the other, and it's going to be order because 2 and 2 and whatever. So I think that boring thing we started out with is about order and symmetry.
Okay, very good.
Torah.
So one more. I have a lot more to get to and not a lot more time to do it. But Bobby?
It's a shame, unless you... Mike, where? Okay, thank you. Unless you've been in Israel and you've been on the top of the Temple Mount, and you've been in the Dome of the Rock, you really can't picture it. It's hard to picture because the rock is huge. Mm-hmm. In fact, bigger than the size of this room. And that's the focus of Islam, and that's where the temple was built. Mm-hmm. That's where the religions come together. And I don't know if it's coincidence or not that in Islamic lore or the Quran, where Muhammad ascended from the temple from the rock.
Right.
And you wonder if Abraham did what God commanded him to do, and in exchange was to be protected for the rest of his life and the rest of his descendants' lives, we've been struggling a long way with God's protection.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, Chapter 33, verse 17. I have just two more places in Genesis to show you, and then maybe we'll learn something.
Chapter 33 of what?
Chapter 33, verse... Genesis, all Genesis, the rest of the way. Chapter 33, verse 17. 220. Okay, who has it? Hillary, would you mind reading?
Which verse? I lost you.
Actually, you can start at 18. Start at 18.
18.
Yeah, it's after 17.
Page 226?
Okay.
Jacob arrived safe, that one?
Yes.
Okay. Jacob arrived safely in the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, having come thus from Padan Aram, and he encamped before the city. The parcel of land where he pitched his tent, he purchased from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesitas. He set up an altar there and called it El Elohe Yisrael.
Okay. So he doesn't set up a whole temple, but this is Jacob's trying to say, I made a deal, so I'm going to do something. So look what he does. He sets up not a mikdash, a mizbeach. There's a difference. The mizbeach, that's the Hebrew here in verse 20, verse 20. Mizbeach is an altar. An altar is part of the mikdash. A mizbeach is where you offer the sacrifice. But a mizbeach is only part of the mikdash. And if you want to have God dwelling there, mizbeach isn't necessarily enough. Because God says, Vasuli mikdash, make for me a mikdash, v'shechanti b'tocham, and then I'll dwell there. So we only have here a mizbeach. So let me just show you one last section. Genesis 35, verse 1. And Hillary, if you could find that, if you could read there too.
Okay.
Chapter 35 of 232 in Plow, verses 1 through 7.
Okay.
And let's see what happens.
God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar to God who appeared to you and when you fled from Esau your brother." So Jacob said to his household, to all who were with him, "Discard the alien gods that are in your midst, cleanse yourself, and change your clothes. Then come, let us go up to Bethel. I will make there an altar to God who answered me in the times of distress and was with me on the road that I traveled." So they gave to Jacob all the alien gods that were in their possession, as well as the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob buried them underneath the terebinth near Shechem. They set out, and there fell a godly terror on the cities which were around them, so that they did not pursue Jacob's sons. Thus Jacob came to Luz in the land of Canaan.
Right, we've heard about this before? Right?
It is Bethel, he and all the people who were with him. And he built there an altar there and called the place El Bethel.
So he comes back to the same place, builds an altar again, but this time with a different name.
For it is there that God has been revealed to him during his flight from his brother.
Right. So he put that altar there, but then now he comes back there again and builds another altar. Which means that maybe he didn't feel that the first altar was good enough, and so he built a second altar. But what he doesn't do still is build the mikdash. However, there's a point here. The point is that when Jacob says, I made a vow, if he made a vow to build a mikdash, he would have built a mikdash. But it doesn't really say, I'm going to build a mikdash. He says, I'm going to build, or I'm going to be part of the building of mikdash, but right now I'm just going to build an altar, a mizbeach.
In the open.
That's Jacob. So he's saying that for himself. Here's my role. My role is that I'm going to take the next step in the progression of my people. So the first step in the progression of our people was that Abraham planted the wood. The wood grew. And we knew the timing was right because it was at the right height, right as Jacob was now going down to Egypt. So as Jacob goes down to Egypt, he makes a pit stop. And the pit stop is in Beersheba. He wasn't going to Ben Gurion University or the Bereshit Hotel or, whatever. He was going to get the wood. So he gets the wood. He chops it up in a way that's perfect and has no problems. And he takes it down to Egypt. And when he gets to Egypt, he places it somewhere for safekeeping and in a way that when the Jews leave, they'll be able to take it with them to leave. And ultimately, that's going to become the wood that is what's called the Briach Hatikun, the middle beam that extends through the whole tabernacle. And by the way, the rabbis explained that there was no, if you look at all of the dimensions of the tabernacle, there's no way this beam could have fit. And only by miracle did it fit, because it wasn't supposed to fit, and it couldn't fit, but God made it fit. But again, the way when they put it in so that it made it fit by miracle, when they were pushing it in, the video evidence that we have from it, it's hard to see exactly the dimensions. It's kind of damaged over the years, the video.
Grainy.
It's grainy. So I just want to show you one last midrash and then try to make this make sense. Okay, so if you look at the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, it says here, Jacob rose early in the morning in great fear and said, the house of the Holy One, blessed be he, is in this place. So you see what just happened there? The midrash said he woke up and he realized it's not that God necessarily is right here in this place and the place is holy. He woke up and either in a vision or in reality, I'm not sure which one, but he woke up in a vision of the holy temple. So in other words, when he woke up and he looked around, he wasn't just on some top hill, sparse hill in the middle of nowhere in, the West Bank. It was like in a virtual reality. And he woke up and he said, oh my gosh, I'm in the holy temple. God's showing me what the holy temple is going to look like. Because you see what it says? The house of the Holy One, blessed be he, is in this place. This is the place of the holy temple. And he was afraid. And he said, how dreadful, meaning how scary it is. This is none other but the house of God. Right? And that's what Beit El means, a house of God. Hence there canst learn, canst means can. Learn that everyone who prays in Jerusalem is reckoned as though he had prayed before the throne of glory, for the gate of heaven is there. And it is open to hear the prayers of Israel, as it said, and this is the gate of heaven. Okay, so I think the point is this. The first couple points are clear. There's this middle beam, and we don't know where they got the wood. But then we go back to Genesis, and we see, Abraham planted the wood. And Jacob got that wood, and took that wood, and went down to Egypt, and left it there for 400 years. Now, they were only slaves for 210 years, but by the time Jacob got there to the time they left, in total, according to the Torah's calculation, ends up being 400 years. That's why, by the way, when God tells Abraham, your people are going to be foreigners in a foreign land for 400 years, and we're only slaves for 210 years, because we were there in this foreign land, seemingly slaves in this weird place for 400 years, but only slaves for 210. That's beside the point. Now the wood's there all this time. And what God told, what Jacob in his dealings with God said is, we're going to take this wood and we're going to build this house to you. But he doesn't really build it. So, but he brings part of it. So Abraham's part of it in that he plants the wood, but also he finds the place. Isaac's part of it in that he's the prototype sacrifice, but then gets taken down from the altar. Jacob's part of it because he brings the wood to his people so that they're going to be able to create the tabernacle, which will ultimately be the holy temple. Now, Abraham and Isaac couldn't bring the wood because Abraham and Isaac never had a people. Jacob is the one that has the sons and has the tribes and inherits the people. Abraham inherits nothing. Abraham's told by God, your children will inherit. Isaac inherits the land of Israel. Jacob inherits the people of Israel. So Jacob has the people. Isaac then is responsible for sanctifying the place. But Jacob's responsible for sanctifying the people. How does he do that? He brings the wood that they're going to use to build this thing. So ultimately what Jacob is saying is, I, Jacob, am not going to build the Mikdash to you. But I, Israel, my people, the people of Israel, will. And I'm going to pass down what they need for the next generation to be able to serve God. So listen to what I'm saying. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob each play a role in passing from one generation to the next, the ability for the next generation to go further in their relationship with God, to do better. And ultimately, that's what Judaism is. Judaism is saying that whatever we do in our generation, and it says this in the Pirkei Avot, you're not required to fix the world completely, nor are you free to desist from trying. In other words, you're supposed to do the best you can so that the next generation can pick up and move closer to God. And so, in thinking about this in the world that we live in today, you know that every generation of Israelis since 1948 have said, I had to go to war, but my prayer is that my children won't have to. Right? On the other hand, the Palestinians have said, I go to war, and I pray my children will go to war. And if you go back to the great Golda Meir, and I left her quote at the bottom of the page, she says, peace will come when the Arabs will love their children more than they hate us. So forget the Arabs for a minute. But the idea of the Jews has always been that we achieve what we achieve for the sake of the next generation. And then we ask the next generation to do the same. Start off where we left, achieve what you can achieve, and then move on to the next generation. So, Truma is a very boring Torah portion. But it has in it, when you get to the end of chapter 26, you get this one beam that seemingly can't fit, doesn't work. But it just goes on and on and on forever. And I think that point of the middle beam that holds it all together, the middle beam that holds the whole tabernacle together, is meant to show that there is this linear line, right, from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Moses to the Jews who schlepped the stuff in the wilderness to Solomon, who builds the first temple, to Ezra and Nehemiah, who helped build the second temple, and all the way to us to keep saying we're going to continue building and building and building so that we Jews get better and better and better. And what I mean by better and better and better is that we're going up the ladder and getting closer and closer in our knowledge to what God is supposed to be. And I think also that there are other people who are not doing that. And you can see the difference in results from where our people are going and where their people are going. But the middle beam that holds it all together is the connection, and I hate to say it because it's cliche, but Lador Vador. It's all about going from one generation to the next in a logical way that brings us closer to God. That's the whole point of what the Holy Temple was supposed to be, and that's why the middle beam represents us, the Jews, Lador Vador. Wonderful. Okay. All right. Shabbat Shalom. Geraldine Brooks. Yeah. That's a great book. Yeah, I forget what it's called, but I have it in my office. It's a really good book. It's a must read, yeah. Yeah. Talks about the Parmesan. Yeah.
Never seems to be like, what does a priest do in the tabernacle? They didn't pray. Right. It was involved in the slaughter of the heavy sacrifice.
They were in charge of offering all the sacrifices. You would bring your animal to the gate, they would take it, and they would sacrifice it. Yeah, but there were a lot of priests and everyone else. So they had to take turns. So everyone had a shift. You weren't there that long.
Kathy emailed me. She was very upset about it.
But I mean, the Talmud actually talks about how the shifts work, and how they decided who got what job.
So I don't
and
think
all
it
this stuff.
penetrated anybody.
It's very interesting. We don't do it. I know. All these times, yeah. The original pirates. And of course, I always thought the Jacob fellow was in the Berkshire. Because it's possible that Abraham might have done lots of things that are one of them. Or that
Hey, Judy. Steve Moses was there. I told him I want to talk to him briefly. With you. There's economic God, he looked at it and had long leaders as control. Look at Orban, the same. But Orban doesn't have the same root. He is a ruthless man. Material. Yeah, he tried to recreate geographically he wants to added up in Greenland. He really is dreaming in his mind that he's doing the same thing. So if we let them, we let Russia go, they're going to 7-8 NATO. They're going right at the end. They're going to take home. That's your best part. And they go in and take the whole ball. Okay, yeah. Exactly. That's not their goal. My, very good. I'm waiting for my wife to do it. That's my view.
Yeah.